I look so much like my dad, you know. Maybe not now, but what about if I do this?
He made America laugh, but who was he when the cameras turned off? To millions, Don Knottss was the king of quirky, the man whose every nervous glance sent audiences into stitches. But behind the iconic characters and Emmy wins was a quieter, more complex role: Dad. In this episode, we're not just peeling back the curtain, we're stepping inside the living room. Through the eyes of his daughter Karen, we'll explore a version of Don you've never seen before. A version filled with unexpected rules, silent sacrifices, and one unforgettable moment that still echoes decades later. One decision she made in his final hours has haunted her for years, and when you hear it, you might understand why. Growing up with Don Knottss. Growing up as the daughter of Don Knottss, Karen Knottss experienced a unique kind of fatherhood, one where humor was not just a personality trait, but a daily language. She remembers her father as endlessly funny, even off stage, using comedy to diffuse tension or make even mundane family moments memorable. But beneath the jokes, she also describes a man of discipline and gentle structure. Don was a stickler for doing things the right way, encouraging her to stay grounded and think deeply, even as she lived under the roof of a man beloved by millions for his bumbling, wide-eyed TV persona. He was both a playmate and a parent, showing her that warmth and responsibility were not mutually exclusive. Karen's path into entertainment was no coincidence. Living in the shadow of such a distinct and celebrated figure didn't suppress her ambition. It shaped it. Watching her father navigate fame with both joy and struggle gave her a realistic view of show business. It wasn't always glamorous, but it was meaningful. Inspired by his commitment to the craft, Karen pursued her own career in comedy and acting. Her one-woman show, Tied Up in Knots, is a tribute not only to Don's legacy, but to their bond as parent and child. She carved out her own voice by embracing the echoes of his, building a bridge between their generations of laughter. Karen's holocaustic memory about her father doesn't derive from a stage or set, but comes from his hospital room. While he lay dying, quite weakening because of the illness, but not failing in spirit, he still could crack jokes and make his wife and her laugh uproariously. She said that she needed to step out, not from grief, but because she did not want to laugh in front of her dying father. The moment haunted her until a friend reminded her that laughter was what Don lived for. This was the very last gift of a man who would let nothing silence what defined him most: his ability to lift others through humor. Beyond the spotlight, Don Knottss was a father who gave Karen more than just access to Hollywood. He instilled values, modeled resilience, and showed her the human side of a public figure. She doesn't talk about him just with admiration. She talks about him with deep affection for the man he was at home. Quiet, thoughtful, and kind. While the world knew Don as Barney Fife, to Karen, he was Dad, the man who took time to talk, who loved quietly, and who left a legacy that had less to do with television ratings and more to do with the people he touched personally, especially his daughter. But to truly understand the man Karen called Dad, you have to go back to a childhood where laughter wasn't entertainment, it was survival. Laughing through pain. Don Knotts' early years in Morgantown, West Virginia, were marked by stark poverty and emotional chaos. Born as the youngest of 4 boys to parents who were already struggling financially, Don entered a world where survival often came before comfort. His mother, Elsie, was in her 40s when he was born, a late-in-life child in a home already worn down by hardship. The family had recently lost their farm, and money was scarce. In this harsh environment, Don was often left to navigate childhood without the warmth or stability most children take for granted. The most harrowing part of Don's upbringing was the presence of his father, William Jesse Knotts, whose battle with schizophrenia and alcoholism created an atmosphere of fear. His father's behavior was unpredictable and sometimes violent. Don would later recall moments when his father threatened him with a knife. These traumatic experiences were compounded by a lack of emotional support from his much older brothers, who were often distant or rough. The result was a childhood shaped not by nurturing, but by emotional survival. A formative period that planted seeds of deep anxiety and a need to escape. That was how Don escaped, by imagining things. Cut off from family and the alien world outside, he established a personal universe that was safer, kinder, and more controllable than the one he lived in. He invented an imaginary friend, and eventually a ventriloquist's dummy named Danny, through whom he was able to become involved with a series of one-man comedy acts for himself and others. This was not what one would necessarily term self-entertainment was a lifeline. It meant control and happiness for Don, who learned that he could transform fear, if only for a short while, into laughter. Those early bruises and leaks actually became the raw material for his comic genius later. He didn't just pretend to be nervous on the big screen. Nervousness lived inside him, and he channeled it in a particular persona that audiences found funny, but very lovable. His stammering delivery, twitchy expressions, and wide-eyed innocence were not merely exaggerated traits, but represented genuine extensions of the child he had been. What was initially a coping mechanism matured into perhaps one of the most recognizable of all comic personae in American television. In transforming trauma into laughter, Don Knotts discovered not only healing, but a means of connecting with millions. Don Knotts' influential brother. Among Don Knotts' older brothers, it was Sid who stood out, not just in Don's memory, but in shaping the man he would become. While the family home in Morgantown was often a place of tension and dysfunction, Sid offered Don something rare: laughter. Larger than life in Don's eyes, Sid had a natural wit and comedic spark that broke through the gloom of their upbringing. Unlike the other brothers who kept their distance or lashed out under the weight of their own struggles, Sid connected with Don in a way that felt safe and uplifting. He could make their mother laugh even during the darkest times, and Don absorbed those moments like sunlight in a storm. Sid's humor wasn't performative. It was instinctive, off the cuff, and deeply human. Don, still a child, watched intently as his older brother made light of their heavy reality. He studied Sid's timing, delivery, and ability to turn an ordinary moment into something joyful. That exposure planted the seeds of Don's future in comedy. It wasn't just about being funny, it was about surviving hardship through humor. Sid showed Don that laughter could be both rebellion and refuge. In many ways, Sid was Don's first audience, mentor, and comedic role model, all rolled into one. Sid's loss was sudden, and certainly seemed to affect Don for good. He was very young at the time of Sid's severe asthma attack, when Sid eventually died. Grief engulfed him because he lost not just a brother, but also a hero and a shining light of joy in a joyless household. He will always carry such a kind of grief with him throughout his life. This made the loneliness deeper than ever, strengthened the retreat into the imaginative and comedic world, and allowed him to feel connected to the only sibling who ever understood him. Sid's ability did not leave Don. In his career, from characters like Barney Fife to innumerable others, Sid's brilliant wit mixed with fearless humor. Don would talk to Sid several times, revering and loving, just by possibly pointing out that he was the father figure shaping his comedic instincts. In that sense, Sid was living through Don's acts, immortalized in laughter from audiences who would never even know his name. The laughter behind each joke was a memory of a brother who sparked the fire of laughter, which would one day illuminate the screens across America. From soldier to showman. When World War II interrupted Don Knotts' early pursuit of a show business career, it also unexpectedly launched him into the world of professional performance. Enlisting in the United States Army in 1943, Don was assigned not to combat, but to the Special Services Division, an elite unit focused on entertainment and morale. There, he served in the 68th 17th Special Services Battalion, a group responsible for putting on variety shows for troops stationed in far-flung corners of the Pacific. Rather than a rifle, Don wielded punchlines and pratfalls, helping to keep spirits high during one of the darkest periods in global history. Don toured with the Army's traveling show, SARS and Gripes, performing comedic sketches that played on military life's absurdities and universal frustrations. These routines were often performed under difficult conditions, in sweltering heat, on makeshift stages, and for weary soldiers desperate for distraction. Don's nervous energy and signature delivery struck a chord, making him a standout even among the seasoned performers he shared the stage with. His time entertaining soldiers across the Pacific provided him with an invaluable, live learning laboratory. It was here, not on Broadway or in Hollywood, that Don truly cut his teeth as a performer. Military life was a lot more than just a stage in Don's life. It provided him with confidence. Previously shy and soft-spoken, he got discipline and the encouragement of large, admiring audiences from the Army. Performing night after night, often to different groups of troops in different islands, honed his timing, resilience, and adaptability. These experiences prepared him not only for the technical demands of entertainment, but also for its emotional challenges. For the first time, Don began to believe he would be able to make it as a performer, not in a dream context, but in terms of destiny. He earned the recognition of various awards, such as the World War II Victory Medal, Asiatic Pacific Campaign Medal, finished with 4 Bronze Service Stars, and the Philippine Liberation Medal. His awards also included the Good Conduct Medal and a Marksman Badge for his M1 carbine training. Though most of his activities were for performance, those medals reflected a man driven by discipline and honor. His time in uniform impacted him for good, not just through medals, but more by how it shaped him into a polished, confident showman who would become one of America's most loved comic actors. Building confidence. After serving in the U.S. Army during World War II, Don Knottss returned home with a renewed sense of purpose and a desire to pursue his passion for performance. Recognizing the value of formal education, he enrolled at West Virginia University, majoring in education with a minor in speech. The post-war campus environment provided Don with a more stable and supportive atmosphere than he'd ever known, and he flourished. Through coursework and speech training, he developed the vocal control and clarity that would later become hallmarks of his comedic delivery. For the first time, Don began to view performance not just as a dream or survival mechanism, but as a viable, trainable profession. Outside the classroom, Don threw himself into campus life with an enthusiasm that surprised many who remembered him as a shy, withdrawn child. He joined the Phi Sigma Kappa fraternity, where he built friendships and further honed his public speaking skills. He also became involved in campus theater productions and local radio shows, giving him valuable stage time and technical experience. These performances allowed him to experiment with timing, character work, and improvisation, tools that would become crucial in his later television career. Every sketch and student play were a stepping stone, each one building his confidence and presence. The stage was finally set for the new star when he did his big Broadway break in a comedy called No Time for Sergeants, where he worked with Andy Griffith for the first time. He received raving reviews for his performance as Twitchy Corporal, showing his flair for playing nervous, winning underdogs, an image that would follow him through all his best-loved roles. Rigorous learning and an unwillingness to give up would seem to have put Don Knottss right before the judgment of transforming a dreamer into a performer of substance. The discipline of academic life, the criticism of audiences and teachers, and the safe waters of experimentation gave him some tools to succeed in show business. In addition, this learning experience stood in stark contrast to the chaos in Knotts' life, giving him tools not only to act, but to be able to analyze the workings of communication, storytelling, and performance. Thus, college was not just preparation for Don Knotts' career, but perhaps ultimately for his legacy. But just as his star began to rise, an invisible weight threatened to pull it all back down. The hidden battle. Behind Don Knotts' signature twitchy charm and comedic nervousness was a very real and private struggle with anxiety that followed him throughout his life. Even before he rose to fame, Don experienced intense stage fright and self-doubt that often left him physically and emotionally paralyzed before performances. While audiences found his portrayal of awkward, jittery characters hilarious and endearing, Don wasn't playing a part. He was reflecting his own inner turmoil. The man who could make millions laugh struggled daily with fears that he was never quite good enough, a feeling rooted deeply in his traumatic childhood and compounded by the pressures of performance. To manage his debilitating anxiety, Don turned to medication during the 1950s and 60s, a time when mental health treatment was poorly understood and often stigmatized. Doctors prescribed tranquilizers and other medications to help him cope with pre-performance panic. But over time, he grew dependent on them. These medications dulled his anxiety, but also left him emotionally detached and, at times, physically unwell. Though they enabled him to function under the bright lights of Hollywood, they masked rather than addressed the root causes of his struggles. Don's comedic brilliance was often powered by sheer will, performed through a fog of medication and mental strain. In tandem with great fame came great internal trials. The public image of Don Knotts as a lovable, wide-eyed everyman could not have been a more distant image from the man who spent hours second-guessing himself on the way to the stage. His fear of failure intensified with the expectations of fans, directors, and studios. He had begun showing signs of hypochondria, convincing himself that by some miracle he was seriously ill, while doctors found absolutely nothing wrong with him. Worst of all, that same anxiety started to eat away at his health and further crippled his inner world. Karma then vehemently struck back to create a vicious circle of fame fueling fears, and fears undoing his career. Mental health issues eventually took their toll on Don's personal life and relationships. His long working hours and emotional withdrawal rendered him incapable of connecting with mates and maintaining any stability at home. He divorced from his first wife and subsequent relationships suffered from his inner turmoil. On the set, colleagues noted his need for control and perfection, an issue that proved to be in perfect disharmony with his genius for comedy. A man esteemed for making others happy, but encumbered by sadness that proved difficult to share. Even so, he persevered to prove that behind every funny guy, there is an unbelievably complicated man. Don Knotts' complicated love life. Don Knotts' love life was as layered and complex as the characters he played on screen. He was married 3 times over the course of his life, each relationship reflecting a different chapter in his personal and professional journey. His first marriage was to Catherine Metz, in 1947, shortly after his return from World War II, and while he was still finding his footing in show business. They had 2 children together, but as Don's fame grew with The Andy Griffith Show, the pressures of Hollywood and long work hours created distance, leading to their eventual divorce in 1964. He married again in 1974 to Laura Lee Chuchna, a relationship that also unraveled after nearly a decade, marked by the challenges of his declining mental health. It wasn't until 2002 that Don married Frances Yarborough, his third and final wife, with whom he remained until his death in 2006. Fame brought Don professional success, but personal strain. The demands of a career in television, combined with his struggles with anxiety and self-doubt, made it difficult for him to maintain emotional availability in his relationships. His perfectionism on set didn't always translate into stability at home. Reports suggest that as his career soared, his personal life suffered. His dedication to craft often left little room for nurturing his marriages. Compounding this was his tendency to keep emotional pain internalized, making communication difficult during times of conflict. His first 2 marriages ended in quiet disconnection. Not scandal, but the underlying issue was consistent. Don had trouble balancing the man the world adored with the man his partners needed. It was interesting that while Don was always typecast as the bumbling and awkward man on screen, who would hardly hold a conversation with a woman, in real life, his dating interests painted quite another picture. Never quite the producer's ideal choice off-screen, he was more or less what was called a player's player. His colleagues remember him as charming and confident, whereas those characteristics were fraught with anxiety. Among Hollywood's social circles, he was liked and reportedly had no trouble attracting women's attention. That duality made Don especially interesting, a man who had seemed to master the trick of letting people underrate him while quietly exuding charisma that few ever expected from the man behind Barney Fife. Don's last marriage to Frances Yarborough had a very different tone to it within Don's romantic narrative. They did not meet until late in life, when neither was chasing career highs or public validation anymore. Frances was much younger and, with great empathy, became a calming influence for Don's last years. Less about red carpets, their relationship was built on shared love and companionship. By the time they were married, Don had gone through enough ups and downs in life that he could find some semblance of peace with a partner now. To Frances, he was not just an actor. He was a vulnerable man still seeking connection. Their veiled union gave solace and comfort during the last health battles of Don's life, with Frances at his side when he passed. Proof that even difficult love stories can have their happy endings. Reinventing the funny man. Don Knotts' decision to leave The Andy Griffith Show in 1965 was a bold and risky move that marked a turning point in his career. At the time, Don believed the show would end after its 5th season, so he began exploring other opportunities, including a 5-film contract with Universal Studios. When the series unexpectedly continued, Don had already committed to his new path and did not return as a regular cast member. Though he later made guest appearances, his departure closed the chapter on Barney Fife, the role that had earned him 5 Emmy Awards and made him a household name. Don was eager to prove that he was more than just a sidekick, that he could lead. In the years that followed, Don explored various film roles in an effort to redefine his career. He starred in The Incredible Mr. Limpet, 1964, a part-animated family film that showcased his quirky charm, and The Reluctant Astronaut, 1967, where he again played the lovable underdog. However, his biggest gamble came in 1969 with The Love God, a risque comedy in which he played a bachelor running an adult magazine. The The film was an attempt to break from his squeaky clean image, but audiences weren't ready to see the nervous deputy as a sex symbol. The movie flopped commercially, and critics were divided. Some appreciated his willingness to take risks, while others felt it missed the mark. In 1970, Don showed indomitable courage to try television again in the Don Knottss Show. It was designed with a variety show format that had promised to let him show off his funny side in skits and interviews, and enjoyed an auspicious star. Unfortunately, it failed to take off and lasted just one season. The problem was that it suffered from being too diverse, not good enough to distinguish itself in a very busy TV world, and missing the ensemble magic that made the Andy Griffith Show so wonderful. The courageous failure of his variety show was sobering proof to Don that it took more than just star power to ensure success, especially when audiences had come to associate him so closely with one single iconic character, Barney Fife. Don learned the hard way that such experiences were about typecasting and the limitations of reinvention. The remains of Barney Fife seemed only too large against his reeling attempts at diversifying. He now realizes that there is more to shedding a beloved persona than just getting into something new. Renegotiating one's presence in the eyes of the public is the first hurdle one would have to cross, and that is seldom achieved. His subsequent career had elements of continued risk-taking, albeit some of them didn't resonate widely with the audience. From the outset, Don did return to the TV screen, this time with a cavalcade of characters that embraced some variants of the nervous man he so exemplified. Not, in his view, a defeat, but rather a celebration of his originality and merit in comedy. A friendship that transcended fame. The friendship between Don Knottss and Andy Griffith began not under the bright lights of television, but on the stage of Broadway in the mid-1950s. The two met while performing in the military-themed comedy No Time for Sergeants, where Don played a hilariously twitchy preacher and a bumbling corporal named Manuel Dexterity, while Andy starred in the lead role of Will Stockdale. It was during this run that their natural chemistry became apparent. Don's finely tuned nervous energy played perfectly against Andy's grounded, folksy charisma. They didn't just share the stage, they shared a rhythm, a comedic balance that made their scenes magnetic. This early bond, formed through mutual respect and creative synergy, laid the groundwork for one of the most beloved partnerships in television history. When the Andy Griffith Show launched in 1960, it was Andy himself who recognized the potential of working with Don again. Don had seen the pilot and jokingly suggested Andy would need a deputy, and that he was the man for the job. Andy agreed, and Don was cast as Deputy Barney Fife. Their dynamic became the heart of the show. Andy's straight-man calmness gave Don the space to explode with nervous energy, stammering lines, and slapstick moments that consistently stole the spotlight. But it wasn't competition, it was collaboration. Andy often stepped back from the comedic focus to let Don shine, a rare generosity that stemmed from their mutual affection and trust. This unselfish give and take became a defining feature of the show and played a key role in its enduring popularity. Their friendship remained unbroken far away from the soundstage. And even though their careers took different paths, Don into movies and Andy into television, the bond forged in their youth remained as strong as ever. The two remained in touch through the years and found time for reunion projects and specials from time to time. In Don's last years, however, their bond became stronger and much more personal. During Don's decline due to cancer and complications from macular degeneration, it was Andy who journeyed to the hospital to be by Don's side. Although they had long since ceased their professional collaboration, Andy did not show up as a former colleague, but as a loving friend. quietly, respectfully, and with deeply felt emotion. It was a full-circle moment for two men whose lives had been bonded by laughter, trust, and creative magic. Andy Griffith's goodbye to Don Knotts is one of the most heart-wrenching moments in show business. Andy, in an interview conducted after Don had died, recalled sitting beside his dying friend, speaking softly, calling him Jess, an affectionate nickname based on Don's real name, Jesse, one he rarely used in public. Don was too weak to respond with words, but with a slight nudge of his shoulder, he signaled Andy that he had heard him. The last exchange was gentle and unvoiced, and so became a fitting metaphor for their friendship. Understated, yet unbreakable, founded on love. Their final goodbye was quiet, but what came next spoke louder than words ever could. Don Knotts' legacy. In the final chapter of his life, Don Knotts faced a series of devastating health challenges that would test even the most resilient spirit. Diagnosed with macular degeneration, he gradually lost his eyesight, a cruel twist for someone whose expressive face and keen visual timing had defined his career. Yet, it was his later diagnosis, lung cancer, that would ultimately claim his life. Don had been a smoker in his earlier years, a habit he had long since given up, but the damage had been done. As the disease progressed, he underwent chemotherapy and other treatments, all while trying to shield his loved ones from the worst of it. He kept his diagnosis mostly private, perhaps hoping to avoid pity, or perhaps driven by his lifelong instinct to protect others from discomfort, even when he was suffering himself. Remarkably, even as his health declined, Don Knotts continued to live with humor and grace. His daughter, Karen Knotts, recalled how he was still cracking jokes on his deathbed, making his wife and daughter laugh so hard they had to leave the room. This wasn't a staged performance or a desperate act of denial. It was Don being Don. He knew that laughter was his gift, his way of connecting with others, and he wasn't going to let death change that. In those final moments, his instinct wasn't to lament or withdraw. It was to perform, to lift the spirits of those he loved most. That decision, to face death with comedy instead of fear, speaks volumes about the man behind the roles. It wasn't just his career that was built on making people laugh. It was his identity. The legacy of Don Knotts is definitely beyond measure, in both the areas of entertainment and in the hearts of those who came to know him well. This man brought so many characters to life, including one of the most treasured of all, Dear Barney Fife, a character that earned him 5 Emmy Awards and secured a position in American pop culture forever. From movies to television to live theater, his works reflected a canvas of versatility and depths that went unnoticed often during his lifetime, but are truly appreciated by contemporary viewers. Yet, aside from the awards, the legacy Don left behind consisted of kindness, humility, and deep empathy. To his family, he was not a star. He was a loving father, a thoughtful husband, and a man whose true genius lay in not just what he did, but in who he was. Over the years since he died in 2006, the world has paid tribute to Don Knotts in various ways. His town, Morgantown in West Virginia, boasts a life-size statue of the man with an expression he is instantly recognizable by, commemorating the laughter he'd brought to millions. Reruns of The Andy Griffith Show continue to air, introducing audiences to his work and keeping his spirit alive in high definition. Other comedians cite him as a primary source of their inspiration, while fans post his stories and quotes in everyday life, immortalizing him. Whether through an emotional tribute from a compatriot or a chuckle from someone's rerun viewing, then Don Knotts lives on, not just as an entertainer, but as a sign of the joy, endurance, and timeless powers of making people laugh. If Don Knotts' story moved you like it did us, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more untold stories behind the icons you thought you knew. Got memories of Don or a favorite Barney Fife moment? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear it. And before you go, click on the next video on your screen. Trust us, you won't want to miss it.